All right, hey, welcome back to Isolation Youth Group. Glad you guys can all join me again this week. Last week we talked a little bit about what's going on in the world, but how God can often use these as opportunities for believers to really step out, to be able to do something different, to do good in these bad times. And what I want to do today is I want to answer a box of knowledge question. One of these questions that I had you guys submit a couple months ago, and this is such a good time to be able to get back to these, to answer them as a video. Now, as always, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on these, on these lessons of mine. You can comment on these videos, or you can message me directly on Instagram or Facebook or through text message, because I want to keep in touch and stay connected, and let's talk about some of these things I'm talking about. So the question I'm going to answer today, it's a personal question, but it's something I think a lot of people can relate to. And so the question that was asked was, how many times did you have to fight the fact if there was a God? So in my life, did I ever question if God was real or not? Was he there? And how I want to answer this question is, I've never really questioned in my life if there was a God or not. Because that's the way I was raised, the way I was taught. Those questions just never really came to my mind. But the questions that I had came along the lines of, who is God? Or what is God? I knew he was real, but I haven't always understood actually, how does he relate to us? How does he connect to us? And who is he really? And so I've shared some of these stories. I'm going to share two main stories today. And I've shared these stories actually a lot during youth group, in my lessons, because they had tremendous value on my life and changed my life a lot. But maybe today is just it's a moment for you to be able to hear these stories again, and maybe I'll be sharing more details about them, and it can be something that you can really relate to and kind of understand, like, I see how this makes a difference, and maybe you can see how it relates to your life also. So like I said, I've grown up, I was always told about God, I was always taught the Bible, in a Christian family, going to church all the time, and so I had never at a young age had to question that thought of, is God real? I just kind of grew up being taught that God was real. I went to a Christian school where we used to make jokes about kids that went to public school and how they weren't going to heaven, which is not true. That's just when we were 6 years old, that's what we believed. If you didn't go to the Christian school, then you weren't saved. Obviously not a true statement, but like I said, I did not really understand who God was at this time. And so the first experience that really changed my life came when I was about 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, I had a cousin who was hit by a car and killed. She was at the time 15 years old, not much older than me. And truthfully, I didn't really know her that well. We lived about 14 hours apart, so I'd see her maybe once every year or once every other year. So I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with her in my life. But I remember how this absolutely just floored me. And I was just shocked at what had happened. I remember when my mom told me, I just laid on her bed and cried for probably 30 minutes straight because I just couldn't understand what was going on. And the questions I had during this time was, for a little bit, maybe I did have a question of, God, are you out there? Why are you allowing this to happen? I could not understand in my mind why God would allow a Christian to die who's part of a Christian family. I couldn't understand why God would allow bad things to happen to good people. I know this is a very normal question. It's a normal question that a lot of people in the world have. It's one of those questions that people, they bring this up as an argument against God. To say God can't be real, because if he is real, if he is all powerful and all loving, then he would never let these bad things happen. And what this experience taught me was, several things. One thing it taught me was that the world it's a naturally bad place. This world is not good. We can see that in our lives. We can see that in the news. We can see that what happens in this world is that bad things happen. And also that God has allowed us freedom to live and to choose to do things that we want to do. This means that people do bad things because they want to do those bad things. This means we don't always do what is good. And so I learned that that all happens, that there is just bad things in this world. This world is naturally bad. But my cousin really taught me an important lesson, is that God works through these bad times. It's just like the story of Joseph and his brothers, where Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, and then he later tells him, God used this for good. I shared that story last week also about how God uses these things for good. And that's what I felt a lot from this. I remember at her funeral, I was sitting there and there was people coming on stage. There was teenagers, there was adults, and they were all sharing about how this 15-year-old girl had changed their lives, of how they would go to church some days just during the week, not at youth group, not at Sunday school, and they would hear her praying in the youth room, just out loud speaking to God, not realizing that anyone could hear her. And I remember just thinking, that's insane. Like this 15-year-old girl who is so dedicated to Christ and to following him that she shows it in her life even when no one else can see it. And to hear stories of people of how she was changing their lives, it really was showing me, wow, God was really working through this time. And I remember then later at her visitation, I remember going out because we had our own private room as a family because we were there for the whole time and we wanted to be able to get away from the crowds. I remember going out of the room once just to kind of look at who was all there, and I remember there's a line of hundreds of people stretched out the door and down the block who all wanted to come to say goodbye to her, to see her one last time before we buried her. I just remember thinking, like, what kind of person can have that kind of impact? I know the kind of person that has that kind of impact is someone who's following Christ, someone who God is working through. And even at 12 years old, this was that first moment where I saw, God, I know you are real and I know you are working, even when things seem awful, even when things seem at their lowest, even when things seem too bad for anything else. I can see that you are still working. And just recently, I actually read a book that my aunt, my cousin's mom, wrote. She wrote about this event, actually. And I read this maybe a year or two ago, 13 years after my cousin had passed away. And even then, as I was reading it, I was seeing all these stories I had never heard before, seeing all these different things that had come out of her death. And I saw how God had worked for years and years through that event, how he worked for so long through that. Or even 13 years later, I was still impacted by it. I still was able to see God working. Through the life of a 15-year-old girl, I really learned that not only does God work in the bad times, he also works through ways that we might not always see. That he can work through a 15-year-old girl who just wants to change the world, wants to make an impact, wants to lead people to Christ. So that was the first major experience in my life that really changed my view of God, changed what I believed of him, of how he worked, of who he was. The second event is another one I've shared a lot about in youth group. And this happened my sophomore year of college. It had to do with my friend Justin. I've shared a lot about my friend Justin before. And what's interesting about my friend Justin is that we went to a Bible college. And at this college, it was required that everyone who came would have to fill out a form and sign that they were a Christian, and they'd have to share a little bit about their testimony. Because it was a school where we wanted people to come who wanted to learn more about God. That's the point of it. What was interesting about Justin is that he was an atheist. So he didn't believe God is real. He didn't believe the Bible is real. He didn't believe anything about Christianity. And yet here he is at a Bible college where he is required to take classes that teach him about the Bible. And I just remember the first time talking with him, and he shared this, and me and my friends are sitting there like, bro, do you not know what kind of college you're at? Which, interestingly enough, he didn't realize it was a Bible college when he came there. He was kind of recruited to come under false pretenses. That's all I'm going to say about that. But it was just so interesting to talk to him, and he had a goal at the school to convince people that the Bible was false, that God was not real, that it was all just a lie that was made up. And so we would talk with him all the time. I think multiple times a week, we'd be hanging out in one of our rooms, and we'd just be debating with him and discussing with him about the Bible. And he would share his beliefs on why he thinks the Bible is false, why this story in the Bible couldn't be real, why this story couldn't be real, and here was the actual evidence that was true. And through this experience, I really changed my own beliefs, because up to this point, my whole purpose in life, or what I thought, was basically just to learn information, just to learn as much about God as possible, and then convince people that what I knew about God was actually the truth, and that they needed to believe what I believed. I thought that's what mattered. I thought that was what was the most important thing in life. And if you know now, I'm very clear on it's not information that matters, it's how we live our lives for Jesus. And it's moments like this that change that. Because me and my friends, when we would talk with Justin, we had to really back up what we believed. We had to prove why what we believed was true. And so we would give him these evidences, we would give him these reasons. We would look into the history of the world, look at other religions, look at these cultures that were around several thousand years ago, ancient nations and peoples, and what they believed and what they said, and how it all proved, a story in the Bible, and how it all showed that what the story in the Bible said was actually true. I remember just talking with Justin, and he would get all fired up about, well, I read this article and it said this and this and this, and that's why the Bible is wrong. And then we'd share our beliefs, and he would sit there just stunned like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. That really makes sense. And he was beginning to see that the evidence we were bringing to him was a lot stronger than the evidence that he was bringing against the Bible. Because he was just bringing what other people had told him, and what we were bringing was facts from history. Facts from what we had learned through our studying. And so what it did was two things. For one, it showed me that it's not information about God that's important, it's about how we live for him, and it's about how we use that to then share the gospel with other people. And part of my relationship with Justin was just trying to show him love as Christ has loved me, and show him what that actually looks like. The other thing it showed me was that I needed to be able to back up why I believe what I believe. This is something I really try to press to my students here, to you guys, that I don't want you ever to believe something just because I say it's true. I want you to believe it because you have seen it to be true, you have studied it, you have found the reason why it is true. That's what I had to learn with Justin, was I had to learn, why do I believe what I believe, and why is what I believe actually true? And this was, this was a whole year of working on him. Never really saw what came out of it, that first year, but the second year, I had one of the greatest moments of my life where Justin came into my room and he shared with me he had given his life to Christ, that he had a dream of seeing Christ, and when he woke up, he's just like, I can't fight that he's not real. I know he's real. I know he loves me and he cares about me and he wants to save me, and he gave his life over to Christ. And I'll be honest, I cried in my room for about an hour after that because I was just so excited over what had happened. I just couldn't believe that after all that time, after almost 2 years of talking with Justin, to finally see how God worked through that. These are just several examples, of my life of how I have seen God, of how I have seen that he is real, how I have seen him change lives. I do have reasons to believe what I believe that come from the physical world, but I also believe in the experience of just seeing who God is and how he actually changed my life and how he has changed other people's lives as well. Something that I would love to hear, I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear stories of how God has changed your life or how you've experienced God in your life. Love, for you to post them, post your stories in the comments of this video, or like I said, message me on Instagram or Facebook. Give me a text, give me a call, because I would love to hear about some of that. I don't know, maybe we could share them on a video in a future date, because it'd just be great to hear about how God has been working in your life, how you have experienced him as well. He works in so many different ways, and we all experience him in different ways, and we should share those with each other. So I appreciate you guys stepping in, and I'm going to use the winning catchphrase. Like I said, I want to have a catchphrase to end all these videos. The winning catchphrase from last week, that's what I'll end with. I'm going to make sure the person who gave it to me gets this $10 gift card. So to end today, instead of catching COVID-19, I'll be catching you guys next week. See ya.